I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which means for me, I heard tormenting voices 24 hours a day. The next diagnosis for mental illness was severe anxiety and panic attacks. I was also diagnosed with clinical depression. I also was diagnosed with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and I was diagnosed with the offshoots of OCD of cutting. I was cutting my arms and legs, and also something called Trichotillomania, which is hair pulling, along with the anorexia diagnosis also. Physical illnesses, some of them were directly related to starvation, of course, because at 5'9", I spent most of 40 years around 75 or 80 pounds. So those illnesses, I had interstitial cystitis, I had bladder spasms and bladder pain, I had a female pelvic condition called vulvodynia, and those top three ingredients are not nutrient dense. They're inflammatory. They're very inflammatory to the body and the brain. And the different medications that different psychiatrists put me on that were supposed to quiet those voices, that were actual schizophrenia, schizoaffective meds, never made an impact. They just made me sedated. I look back on it now and I am so very thankful for the miracle that my daughter was protected, that my daughter was not punished for my state of health, that she was born healthy. My family, my husband and my daughter, they suffered. They suffered greatly. Watching helpless and hopeless as the years went on, watching me go further down in weight and further down into mental illness, it was time to make a decision. It was time to try this. I had nothing left to try. I had nothing to lose. This was not a medication that was going to cause side effects. This was food. And also backing that research up with Dr. Sean Baker and Dr. Ken Berry, both saying the same thing. All meat is going to heal you, but there are, more nutrients and a power package in red meat than there are in chicken and pork. For the first time in my life, these screaming voices felt now like they were in another room with the door closed. They were still there, still screaming, but they were quieter. That first year at the 12-month mark, everything was gone. Everything was completely gone. The screaming voice, for the first time, as far back as my memories will go, was completely, absolutely, 100% permanently gone. It has been amazing to finally be the wife that I always wanted to be the mom that I always wanted to be, and to be the daughter that I always wanted to be. Everyone in my life prior to this had to be my caretaker. Everything used to be gray. Everything used to be dark. A sunrise and a sunset, or looking at the beach or the ocean, or Christmas and New Year's, those all brought sadness to me. They were not exciting things. They were all gray and sad. And everything is now in full living color.
Hello, everyone. This is Nairi from Low Carbon Fasting. Well, our guest today is a courageous, beautiful, passionate, wise, I'm running out of adjectives to describe her, woman who came from the brink of death with the power of nutrition, believe it or not, with carnivore diet specifically. She not only overcame her battle with anorexia, but also a number of other mental health illnesses and physical illnesses. ValerieAnne Smith, welcome to Low Carbon Fasting.
Hello, Nairi. I'm so honored to be here. I'm excited to be here and speak with you.
Valerie, I'd like you to start with all the conditions, be it mental or physical, that you were diagnosed with.
Okay. On the mental side, I was officially diagnosed with 6 illnesses. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which means for me, I heard tormenting voices 24 hours a day. These voices told me to self-harm and to harm others. And it was a very miserable existence. And I had them for as far back as I can remember, up until my healing 6 years ago through nutrition. The next diagnosis for mental illness was severe anxiety and panic attacks. I can remember being a very small child and being anxious, and it only grew worse as I got older. I was also diagnosed with clinical depression. And all of these diagnoses, of course, under traditional treatment, I had taken a lot of different meds, psychotic meds, to try to mitigate the symptoms. I also was diagnosed with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and at the beginning, as a younger child, it was what you would traditionally think of as OCD, counting, checking things, obsessive over cleaning, cardio sessions of exercise, memorizing calorie books, those kinds of things. And as I got older, it grew much, much worse. And I was diagnosed with the offshoots of OCD of cutting. I was cutting my arms and legs, and also something called Trichotillomania, which is hair pulling. And I would pull scalp hair, eyelashes, and eyebrows until there was nothing left to pull. As a stress relief, the cutting and the hair pulling were a self-harm sort of behavior, a neurological behavior that I just could not stop. So those, and along with the anorexia diagnosis also, that is still a neurological condition of self-harm, that, you know, all of those diagnoses together are, of course, are all about self-harm and self-punishment. So that's the mental illness side of it. And then physical illnesses, some of them were directly related to starvation, of course, because at 5'9", I spent most of 40 years around 75 or 80 pounds. So there were illnesses that were directly related to that. But I also had digestive issues. I had IBS and GERD, which in me was nausea and indigestion and heartburn, those sorts of issues. I had stomach pain. I had IBS. I was diagnosed with hypothyroid. My thyroid wasn't functioning correctly because of lack of nutrition. I had a lot of skin issues, dermatitis, rashes. I had a what was considered a genetic condition that was incurable called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. Because of my malnutrition, I was diagnosed at 16 with severe osteoporosis. Bones were not in good shape for a very long time, and I had injuries that we can talk about from that diagnosis. I had, of course, hormonal deficiencies. You know, all of my hormones were tanked and non-existent, and I had adrenal fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome. I, because of the hormonal deficiencies and because of some of the foods that I was consuming that were high oxalate foods, overconsumption of high oxalate foods, I had illnesses that were physical that were from those that have since healed. But at the time, doctors told me that they were incurable, that I would just have to live with it. So those illnesses, I had interstitial cystitis, I had bladder spasms and bladder pain. I had a female pelvic condition called vulvodynia. The interstitial cystitis and the vulvodynia felt like glass shards internally in the female pelvic region all the time. It was very, very painful, 24 hours a day. I think that probably goes through the some odd 20 of physical illnesses that I dealt with, off and on over the course of 40 years. Some of them diagnosed more as an adult after having decades of malnutrition and starvation, but most of them, all of the time for 40 years. So there was a lot of mental and physical illness.
I think anyone listening to this at this point will be wondering, how do you come back from all of that? How do you heal from all of that? Stay with us if that's the question in your mind, because Valerie is going to share her secret, how she did it, and it worked for her. Valerie, for those of us who luckily have not experienced mental illnesses and anorexia, someone like me, for example, I'm grateful for that. So I have no understanding of what exactly goes on in the mind of someone with an anorexia. For example, what was going on in your mind when you stood in front of the mirror and looked at yourself? What were you thinking?
The term for it, of what most happens when anorexics look in the mirror, is called body dysmorphia. When I would look in the mirror, I saw someone who was very, very heavy, very, very large. And it's a neurological issue that's difficult to explain and most times doesn't really make sense. It's not logical is the point, because it's part neurological, it's part mental illness. I could physically touch my body and feel bones, but when I looked in the mirror, I thought that I saw someone who was obese. So though it didn't match, and at the same time, in an anorexic's mind, there is no stopping point. You can say, I want to get down to a certain number of pounds, but when you surpass it, it's still not enough. That drive to starve, that drive of self-harm never gets fulfilled. You never get to a place, because it's not a regular diet. It's not a diet where your self-worth is intact, you're self-aware, and you like who you are as a person, and you're just trying to shed a few pounds, and you feel better, you like what you see in the mirror. That's what goes on in a normal, healthy brained person. And that's not what goes on in someone who is afflicted with anorexia. There's never a stopping point. There's never a time when you say, okay, I'm good, that's enough, now I can start eating. It never gets to that point. It's always every day, can I eat less? Can my calories go lower? Maybe I won't eat at all. Yesterday I had one more bite of something that I shouldn't have, so today I'm not going to eat. It's all about self-punishment and self-harm.
I interviewed a registered dietitian from your end of the pond, Michelle Hearn.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe familiar with her, who also overcame her anorexia through the carnivore diet. I don't think she's very strict anymore because she doesn't need to, but and she's an athlete as well. So I'll put my interview link with her below as well for my viewers.
I have actually become friends. She and I have become friends She and Nick Norowitz were the co-authors on the anorexia case series that I participated in a year ago. And that's how she and I officially met. They reached out to me to see if I had the documentation and the availability to be featured in this case series that was entered in the Journal of Metabolic Health. And that is how I met both of them. And we've since, like I said, become friends. And she is an awesome.
She's an awesome person, just like you, Valerie. So I'll put that link below as well, so people can. I presume it's open access. I haven't seen the paper.
It is. Yes. It's an 8-page case series, and when it first came out, you have to remain anonymous. So I am patient number 3 under the pseudonym Amelia. But I always knew that when it was officially entered that I was going to reveal myself, so that if I could possibly help more people, so that if someone read the case series and came on Twitter or Instagram and asked if there was a way to contact any of them, so that I could be a resource, I could help counsel, I could help advise. I wanted to come out and reveal myself so that I could be available.
I'm excited now about reading that paper. But with Michelle, we covered the experience of hospital. What was that like for you? Because you would have had to stay at hospital for long periods of time, right?
Yes.
When did the anorexia first start, and what was the experience like for you, the hospital experience?
The anorexia started around the age of 12, and I was officially diagnosed with it at 14 and began some counseling at that point with psychiatrists and psychologists, met with some dietitians and nutritionists and behavior specialists at that point, and that did not yield any improvement, and I continued to lose weight, and at the age of 16 was my first inpatient experience. And it's a very difficult experience. It's very sad existence. It's a very sad environment. For me, that first inpatient experience, every hospital has different policies, but that first one, the very first week that I was inpatient, I was not allowed to have any contact with my family. No phone calls, no visits, nothing. So you're very isolated. I was in a double lockdown unit. I could not access any other part of the hospital. I could not go outside. I was bedbound, and when it was time to attempt to take a shower or go to a therapy session or visit the nurses' station, I had to be wheeled in a wheelchair. And I understand the concept. They're trying to conserve energy and put weight back on. I understand the policy, but it's a very depressing environment. If it's a strictly eating disorder unit, then you're surrounded by others who are also struggling, and you may be rooming with them also. And in my experiences, instead of rallying around each other and talking about making improvements and getting better, it was like a female locker room where everybody sat around and traded secrets of how to keep starving, tricks to trick the nurses, tricks to make it appear like you were gaining weight by holding onto your silverware from your meals and hiding them in places on your body, so that when the weigh-in would happen, it would look like you were gaining weight. So it was a very toxic environment. Also, the things that I learned there were more harmful to further this when I got out. For me, the first experience that happened being inpatient was the nasogastric NG feeding tube. And I look back on it now, it's not nutrition at all. The liquid that is put through that tube is the same top 3 ingredients that is over the counter in Boost and Ensure and all of these different drinks that people purchase now over the counter for toddlers, for athletes, for elderly, thinking that they're helping their nutrition. And those top 3 ingredients are not nutrient dense. They're inflammatory. They're very inflammatory to the body and the brain. It's high fructose corn syrup, canola oil, and soy. It's not nutrition. And again, I understand the policy. I understand the concept. They're trying to keep you alive. They're trying to put weight on you, but it's not weight that heals mental illness. It is weight that just moves the lever on the scale. When it's done through carbs and sugars and inflammatory oils, you weigh more, but it does nothing to improve the mental illness. The mental illness is a neurological disorder that over 100 neurotransmitters need animal foods, needs the amino acids from whole animal food protein and fat to rebuild those neurotransmitters, to rebuild the malnutritioned and broken brain. And that's not what happens in most hospital settings. Some hospitals even have a policy that they are connected with certain churches that have a history of pushing veganism and vegetarianism. And the particular first hospital that I was in had that policy. So when the feeding tube was removed and I was brought a tray of food along with the other patients, it was no protein. It was protein that was put together to try to make a complete protein that vegans use in order to get nutrition. So it was peanut butter with wheat bread or beans with rice, those kinds of combinations to try to mimic what should be fed but wasn't. And the rest of the items on the tray were ultra processed foods. They were packaged cakes and muffins and cookies and pancakes and pies and pudding. And their philosophy was, and still is today, that if you can eat these fear foods, then we'll say that you're well, that you're no longer anorexic. And that's nothing further from the truth. It does not heal any mental illness. It just puts weight on you and they release you to go home. And relapse has already begun. You don't even make it home before you're already plotting to continue the behavior that took you to be inpatient in the first place. Nothing has changed. You just weigh more on the scale. So those inpatient experiences are bad. It kept me alive, but it did not help.
It probably made mental health worse. You couldn't come up with worse combination of ingredients to feed the brain that's already damaged. And it's still the same.
Yes, it is. It's still the same. Yes.
Valerie, so the $1 million question that I always ask type 1 specialist doctors when I invite them, what causes type 1 diabetes? I can ask you the same. What do you think was the cause, or what were the causes of your mental illnesses that appeared when you were so young?
I think the time in which I lived, the decade in which I lived, which was the 70s, nutrition changed. The guidelines changed. Everyone's house was filled with margarine, if at all, because we were in the fat-free craze. So sometimes there wasn't even margarine. There was none. Low protein, low to no fat. That decade reared its head as in pushing pasta and carbs to be highlighted as what was nutritious. That was when a lot of cereal companies were ramping up their production and making more varieties of cereal, and it was a staple for breakfast instead of bacon and eggs. Pasta replaced meat a lot of the times in households. I think that set me up for more anxiety, more depression, more misfires in my brain, more brokenness, because I couldn't think straight. I didn't have the cognitive abilities to make different choices and to have a sound mind. I think nutritionally, that was a very, very large factor. And combining that with a childhood that was difficult in the sense of feeling like I was worthy of love and having a self-image intact, that on the ground level I could say that I liked myself, which I couldn't. That portion of it was from a broken relationship that I had with my biological father. Daughters need their dads. Daughters establish their sense of self with the opposite sex through their dads. And if it's either absent or it's toxic, it can be very harmful for how young girls and young ladies, how they see themselves and how they see themselves fitting into the world. So those two were a combination that just really took me down. It just really set me up for mental issues and nutrition issues that fed off of each other and just continued to drop me into a further descent of madness. It was awful.
Nearly got me started there when you said daughters need their fathers, because I lost my father. He died when I was only 2.
Oh my goodness.
And so I only know his face through the couple of photos. But it was the 70s. We didn't have mobile phones. We weren't taking constant photos, right? So I only have 2 photos with my father. And so if we didn't have those, I wouldn't even know what he looked like. So that was interesting. Okay. So now, when did the voices start speaking to you in your head? And what exactly were they telling you?
Around the age of 12, when all of this began to overwhelm me. Now, up until that point, I wasn't well, but I didn't feel out of control. It's all I had ever known. So I assumed that everybody felt this way. Everybody felt anxious and depressed and cried themselves to sleep and worried about whether their teachers liked them. And I just thought I was overly sensitive or overly anxious. And my anxiety was so bad, I was even diagnosed with an ulcer at 12. So it was, I thought it was, I just thought it was normal. But around the age between 12 and 14, I began to hear this, and I don't know how it is for everyone. I've talked to many people and it's different for everyone, but for me it was a male voice in my head, and it was an audible voice. It wasn't my own thought. It wasn't my own thoughts of, I don't like myself or I need to lose weight. This was an audible male voice, as if you and I are talking right now. He screamed at me to kill myself, to drive off of overpasses when I learned how to drive, to harm people in my family. I had to fight those urges. I had to fight those voices to bring me back to some semblance of reality, to not follow through with what this voice was telling me to do. It surrounded a lot of paranoia also. The voice would tell me that people were out to get me or to harm me. It was a loud, screaming voice that never stopped. My only escape was sleep. That was the only time I had relief. From the moment I woke up until the moment that I fell asleep, this was going on in my head all the time. And it was a loud, screaming voice, evil voice that was violent and evil. And the different medications that different psychiatrists put me on that were supposed to quiet those voices, that were actual schizophrenia, schizoaffective meds, never made an impact. They just made me sedated and someone who heard voices. I never ever experienced a reduction in what that experience was. And every decade that went on that I became worse mentally and physically, I began to pray to not wake up anymore, because my only escape was sleep. So why not just stay asleep?
This might be a silly question, but was it ever possible to speak back to this voice in your head? Could you say negotiate with him? Could you ask him to go away?
I did that. I did, in my own head, have complete conversations. I also had people praying for me and praying over me for relief, for this to leave me, for this to go away. People that I trusted, people that had helped others that had, some spiritual issues that, were helped by that. And even that did not help me. It did not reduce anything. And when I would resist or argue in my head, it became worse. The messaging became more violent and more loud and more incessant. until I felt like I didn't even have touch with reality anymore. My family would try to talk to me, my mom, or later on when I got married, my husband, and it would take a lot of effort to be present with that person that was real and hold a conversation, because this would pull me back in, and I couldn't be present with those that I love.
So, and yet, somehow, through all this, you went to college, you met your husband, you got married, you had children. Tell us how all that happened. All
I
the
went,
happy experiences, or experiences which were supposed to be happy. What were they like to do?
you were supposed to be happy. I went to college for 2 years and had to quit. I could not finish. The first year I went about 4 hours away to college, thinking that I could start over, that I could make a clean break and be someone different, like my environment would maybe make things better. And of course that didn't happen. You can't run from your own head. You can't run from your own problems. You carry those with you. So that year was extremely difficult. I was homesick, and it was not a good year. The second year of college, I transferred closer to home so that I could stay at the dormitory during the week, but come home on the weekends. Again, it was better because I was closer to home. I was also closer to the current psychiatrist that I was seeing. And I was attempting to working with the medical staff there at the university to try to improve my health. But I grew worse. At the end of that second year, I was blacking out and passing out in the restroom, and my dorm mates would find me on the floor and wake me up and get me back to my room and back to bed. So I had to make the decision to leave school. And so I went home and did the best I could to rest and try to feed myself again on the meal plans that the hospitals over the years had sent me home with, which is carb-based. I would put a few pounds on, and of course nothing was changed mentally, so I would quickly relapse again. I tried to hold down a part-time job, and my family worked with me. It was a family business that I worked in, and so they were very compassionate and understanding of the rest that I needed as I tried to work part-time and then try to be better and eat better and try to work more hours. I met my husband at church at the age of 22, and we got married when I was 24. At that point, I had not had a menstrual period for 10 years because of malnutrition. He is amazing. We've now been together for 32 years. He loves me unconditionally, and it was his love that prompted me to continue to try to get better, to try to eat. At the age of 27 was when we said that we wanted to try to start a family, and doctors told me that it was nearly impossible, that they didn't know if I would ever get my period back, if I would even ovulate, and if I conceived, if I would even be able to carry that child to term because of the health of my reproductive organs. Through carbs, I gained enough weight to get my period back and to get pregnant. I look back on it now and I am so very thankful for the miracle that my daughter was protected, that my daughter was not punished for my state of health, that she was born healthy. The pregnancy itself was very difficult mentally. It took everything I had mentally to push down the drive to starve in order to keep enough weight on to sustain the pregnancy, to be protective of the life that was growing within me. This was the time when pushing down the drive to starve, the cutting and the hair pulling reared its head to an unmanageable degree. Because I wasn't actively participating in starving myself, this was how the self-harm morphed into something else. And I was cutting my arms and legs and pulling all of my hair out. I tried to explain it in a way for others to understand, to articulate and have it resonate. And most people are not familiar with the cutting and the hair pulling, but they may be familiar with when someone talks about when they're bulimic and they're purging. There are some, women that will talk, and men that will talk about when the first few seconds of getting the food out, the actual active form of vomiting, that a calm comes over them, a release comes over them. That is what I felt when I would cut my arms and legs and pull hair. There was a momentary few seconds of release and relief, that I was following what the voices told me to do to harm myself. But in that brief moment of actually doing the cutting or doing the hair pulling, there was a little bit of a release there. The same self-harm and release instead of the starvation. Because when I was in active starvation, I would feel that euphoric few second release when I would get lightheaded or when I would go a certain number of days without eating anything. The mental illness part of anorexia, in some semblance, makes you feel powerful at some points because you are punishing yourself and you are mastering your own body. You're not working with your body, you're punishing yourself. And so there were times when you would feel almost powerful. And that was how I felt when I wasn't starving, but I was harming my body through the cutting. And then when my daughter was born, I was able to go back to self-starvation again, and the cutting and the hair pulling would subside, and it would just ebb and flow like this back and forth for years. My family, my husband and my daughter, they suffered. They suffered greatly. Watching, helpless and hopeless as the years went on, watching me go further down in weight and further down into mental illness. My daughter is 27 now, and she's had me healed for 6 years, and we've talked about it at length of what it was like for her as a young child, and then an adolescent, and then a teenager. She felt so worried. I didn't know it then that she cried herself to sleep at night, worried that when she woke up in the morning that I would be gone, that I would have had a heart attack, some sort of cardiac event, because my heart had shrunk half its size and my blood pressure was like 70/50 at certain points. And my husband also, he tried to hold it together most of the time, but there were times when he would just come to me with tears in his eyes and beg me to try harder. He knew that I didn't want to be this way. He knew that I this is not the life that I wanted. But he felt helpless to effect any kind of change. He felt helpless to help me, to suggest or provide, any more than what I had already done. I had exhausted everything. I had done everything. I had been to 45 doctors. I'd been to 12 psychiatrists. I'd been on 10 different meds that only caused side effects and never helped in any way. I had done everything that I knew to do under traditional treatment, and even went to alternative treatment. I went to chiropractors and different ones, Chinese medicine, and I went as far as I possibly could do. I did acupuncture. I did, I did all kinds of things that were popular each decade to try to find help, and nothing ever helped.
Valerie, the starvation part, you couldn't possibly hide that from your family because they would have noticed you're not eating, or you're just taking one bite and that's all. They would have noticed your weight loss. However, with the self-harm, with the cutting and the hair pulling and the eyebrow pulling, how much of it did they witness?
The only ones that knew were my husband and, to some extent, my daughter, because we were living in the same household. But I did shield what I could from my daughter. So she never saw my arms and legs without foundation, liquid women's facial foundation covering and dried on my arms and legs to cover those wounds. On the outside of my house, if you looked closely, my mom knew from looking at my arms and legs that it was going on, but it was covered. So, outside my home, no one really knew. And I was using makeup to put eyebrows back on. I had fake eyelashes. I was either wearing hats, or I was wearing my hair in such a way up in order to cover the bald spots. I did that for years. I knew that I couldn't walk away from the hair pulling, so I would strategically try to figure out where I could pull it from so that I could cover it with another patch of hair. I would get up every day and say, this is crazy, this is ridiculous. You have control over your hands. You can just choose to not do this. You can just choose to stop doing this. And I would do okay for a day or two, and then it would overcome me. I would succumb to it again, and then the spiral of embarrassment and humiliation and shame would settle in because I had done it again. And it would just, I would just do that every few days. I would promise myself I wouldn't do it again, and stay strong for a day or two, and then not be able to continue and succumb to that behavior again. Again, it's a neurological issue. You cannot walk away from this until your brain is healed. And then it's not a struggle anymore. Then it's not, I have to choose to not do this anymore. It actually heals, and you don't ever do it again. You don't ever think about doing it again. It's actually repulsive to me. But people outside the home, didn't know how badly it was. Only those within our home knew how bad. And I still hid it. I still, I did not walk around with my hair down, even around my husband and my daughter. I didn't walk around with open wounds anywhere. I was either, fully clothed, long pants, long sleeve shirts, or I had that makeup on me in order to cover it. So my husband was probably the only one that knew the most.
When was your second daughter born?
When my 7 years later, my daughters are 7 years apart. So in my younger daughter was born in 2003, and we went through the same thing, the same scenario. Prior to her being conceived, I was 75 pounds. My older daughter was 6, and we wanted to try again. And of course, all this time I was still believing traditional treatment. I was thinking, okay, I'll do this again to see if I can get pregnant, and maybe this time it will stick. Maybe this time I'll be better. Maybe this time they're telling me the more I weigh, then I'll be better. The anorexia will go away. And of course, most anorexics are anxious and depressed and have other things going on mentally along with the anorexia. So I believed that if I got to a certain weight, maybe I would be better. So we did the whole thing all over again. And I was able to have my second daughter, and it was just a mirror image of the first time. The same things happened. I gained enough weight to get pregnant and stay pregnant and have her. And the same thing happened afterwards. The immediate urge to self-starve and self-harm took over. And I was, within a year, I had not only lost the pregnancy weight, but I was back down to less than 80 pounds. And so now I had a 7-8-year-old daughter and a toddler. And I tried to hide this from them. I tried to not talk about in front of them. I knew that was bad messaging. I never stood in front of a mirror with them around and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so fat." I was conscious of not wanting to pass this on. I was conscious of not wanting to send any kind of verbal messaging to them. But you can't shield them from the fact that their mom is literally a skeleton. Literally, I was just bones with skin covering. I was, and now I had 2 girls that were worried that their mom was going to die. But there was nothing that I could do about it. Nothing helped. Nothing made me better. And I was back to where I was before, praying to not wake up.
So I think for most people, even just the mental illnesses you've cited and what you've experienced, mentally is too much to bear, right? But on top of it all, you also had a number of very serious physical issues. Because you were a skeleton, as you put it, your organs couldn't stay in place, to put it simply. So take us through that part of your journey.
In 2010, I was 40. My older daughter would have been 13, and my younger daughter would have been 7, I began to have a lot of pelvic pain, excruciating pelvic pain, and difficulty going to the bathroom, urinating, and number 2. I ignored it for a while, thinking that it was just part of my IBS that I dealt with, the irritable bowel syndrome, that it was GI distress, gastrointestinal distress. I was already having some female issues of the vulvodynia and had been diagnosed with vaginal atrophy because I had spent so many decades with estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone not even on a level where they could detect it in my blood work. So I was already having some pain. So this particular set of pain signals I thought was just part of it. When it became worse, and what I mean by worse is when I would stand up, I could feel organs shifting and then coming out. That's when I was alarmed and knew that something terrible was going wrong. And like you said, I had lost all musculature internally and I could not hold organs in place. So after seeing 3 different specialists, I was diagnosed with multi-organ prolapse. My uterus and cervix had prolapsed, and that was diagnosed through a gynecological surgeon, of course. And a urologist was able to do enough testing to detect that my bladder had also prolapsed. And then a gastrointestinal specialist diagnosed that my colon had prolapsed. And all 3 had prolapsed internally. And then my experience when I would stand up is that they were prolapsing externally. And it could have been an emergency surgery, of course, but because it involved 3 different organs that took 3 different types of specialists, I had to wait a long time to have that coordinated in a hospital setting in order to have all 3 of those specialists on board in the operating room at the same time, to each come in and do what they needed to do to try to repair this. They each took turns while I was under. It was a long 12-hour surgery. I am allergic to all opiates, so it was also extremely painful. There was nothing they could offer me in terms of pain relief except for Tylenol and Advil. Even the opiates that I had never had before, and they were convinced that I couldn't be allergic to all of them, they tried, and of course had to immediately give me an antidote to counteract my allergy symptoms. So what needed to be done during the surgery is my uterus and cervix had to be removed. There was no way to save it. My bladder they put back in position the best that they could with mesh internally because there was nothing to suture it to. And my colon was so damaged that they had to remove 18 inches of it, the final 18 inches, and then resection it and then reattach it. And internally they sutured it to my tailbone to keep it in place, to keep it from prolapsing again. My colon, I know, of course, prolapsed because of the lack of nutrition and the lack of muscle internally. The damage that had to be removed was from 30 years of taking stimulant laxatives. That was how I purged. I didn't vomit. I took bottles and bottles and bottles of harsh stimulant laxatives, and that damaged my colon. So that was why that had to be removed. It was badly damaged. Recovery was difficult. The surgery involved a very long horizontal incision. It would be akin to someone having a C-section. It's that sort of incision. Recovery was hard. I was in a lot of pain, and what should have taken about 2 months to recover, it took me a full year. And of course, I was not eating. I was trying to manipulate and fool my family by appearing that I was eating because I was using light and diet cans of soup that had 50 calories in the entire can of soup. It was basically chicken broth with some, cooked celery and cooked carrot in it that you could buy at the store. And that's all I was eating. Hot soup made me feel warmer because I was so cold all of the time. Because I couldn't exercise, I couldn't do the OCD of hours of cardio, then I wouldn't allow myself to eat anything because I couldn't exercise it off. I couldn't burn it off. So the starvation became worse when I was not able to exercise. So that recovery was really bad. And by the time I got to another 5 years in 2015, I had thankfully recovered from that surgery, and everything internally at that point was working okay with those, those 3 organs, one of which had to be removed. But then that was when all of my osteoporotic issues started. And so I had 5 fractures within 5 years, and I was, bed bound again. I had casts and braces and wheelchairs and crutches. And when one would heal, it wasn't very long before another one would happen. And it wasn't from trauma. It wasn't from a car accident or a fall from a high place. It was everyday activities. But because of the malnutrition and the over exercising on my joints and on my bones, it would take no trauma issue at all to just snap. I would step down from bed wrong, or I would pick up a cooking pot wrong and break my wrist, or I would step down off the curb and fracture my leg. So that was another 5 years of of awful existence.
And I think what changed your sort of outlook was, you mentioned this before, was a particular book where you found out that the nutrition that your brain needed all this time was what you were missing in your diet, if you were eating anything. What was that book?
In 2015, that's all I was eating was spinach and celery. Maybe 200 to 300 calories a day. That's all I was eating. The rest of the time I was drinking a lot of hot water to stay warm, coffee, tea with nothing in it. It was mostly just liquid, 0 calorie items. I knew that none of this was working. I knew that weight restoration on carbs was not, was not ever. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I had exhausted that. So I found a book at the library, 2 books actually, by Julia Ross. And one was called The Mood Cure and one was called The Diet Cure. And that was the first time in my entire life that I had ever read or heard that the amino acids in animal foods are what directly fuel and make the neurotransmitters in your brain. I had been exposed to nutrition. I thought that I was doing the right things by feeding my family whole wheat pasta and whole wheat bread. I listened to the media and the messaging, and I was interested in nutrition, but it was all based on current guidelines. And of course, even in school, as a youngster or in college, the nutrition classes talked about the food groups, but no one ever had ever brought up no amount of hospital visits, the different dietitians that I had, the nutritionists that I had, even psychiatrists. No one ever asked me what I ate in terms of what was being excluded and how many years I had gone without that in order to help me to understand that there were actually foods out there that could help my brain. And so those two books by Julia Ross was my first introduction into a light bulb moment, a little glimmer of hope that I could possibly be a little better. And at that point, I was ready to take anything, any improvement. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I could ever be healed. I was just hoping for some sort of reduction in any of the 6 mental illnesses that I had been diagnosed with. And I think the reason that it was kind of a eye-opening light bulb moment to me is because those were the 2 foods that I cut out first, protein and fat, and those were the 2 that I had not eaten in 35 years. There are those suffering from anorexia that strictly count calories, and they still eat some animal foods as long as they're under a certain calorie, for that day. And so I think it made such an impact for me because that was the exact foods that I had taken out so many years prior. And I began to ruminate on this. I began to ponder this. Could this actually be true? Could this actually help me? Could it actually be that animal foods could actually help my brain? At that same time, I was introduced to YouTube on our first smart TV. And so I began to see if I could further my knowledge on this. And I searched on YouTube for any kind of discussion or TED Talk that I could possibly either find Julia Ross or other people out there, other doctors out there that are also talking about this to learn more. And that was when I found Dr. Georgia Eid and Dr. Chris Palmer. They became my mental health lifeline. I watched everything that they had. And then I got on the computer and got online and read everything that was online that both of them were talking about. And it was time to make a decision. It was time to try this. I had nothing left to try. I had nothing to lose. This was not a medication that was going to cause side effects. This was food. I had already spent a decade on no medication whatsoever. I had titrated myself off of all of those psych meds at the 30-year mark, 10 years prior to my healing. So I didn't have to deal with trying to titrate those meds with a doctor or convince the doctor to let me try it. I had already done that on my own, and at that point was not under any kind of psychiatric care, because my last 3 psychiatrists, they basically fired me. They told me if I wasn't going to comply with their rules, to not come back, that I was treatment resistant and I needed to just accept the fact that this was how I was going to stay, and to just accept it, and for my family to just accept it. So I was not under, any psychiatric care at that point either. to talk me out of trying this. So I did this on my own, constantly learning more, constantly reading more. At the same time that I had my two mental health powerhouses in Dr. Eid and Dr. Palmer, that is when I found Dr. Sean Baker and Dr. Ken Berry, and was introduced to not only using food and animal foods to heal the body and the brain, but specifically the carnivore diet and the lion diet. And so I made an organized plan. I had to figure out a way that I could do this. I was not the normal person that was going to exchange one whole plate of food for a whole plate of meat. I was not the person that was going to be able to eat spoonfuls of tallow or eat spoonfuls of oil to get into ketosis. There was no way that I could do that. I mean, at the rare occasions that we went out to eat, I would even find myself arguing with the server and the cook if I suspected that there was any kind of oil on my steamed broccoli, because it had to be plain. I could not allow myself to eat that. So I knew that I had to start with whole meat, and it needed to be something that I could think of as being benign or bland or no strong flavors, no strong colors. So for me, that was fat-free chicken breast. And my tiny little dose that I did every day was 1 ounce. That's where I started. 2 tablespoons. And it took everything I had to get that down. I sat at the kitchen table and cried for hours trying to get that down. But that was my organized plan, hoping that in a week or a week and a half, that those 2 bites got easier and I could double it. That was the plan that I put myself on. I knew that I had to go super slow because my whole life I had lived with relapses where if I would spend one day eating a bite of something that I felt like I didn't deserve, then the next day I wouldn't eat it all. And so I would sabotage myself. I knew if I was going to try this one last time to save my life, because I wasn't going to survive another year. I wasn't. So that was my organized plan, and it worked. Every week or every week and a half, that ounce got easier, and so that ounce became 2, the 2 became 3, the 3 became 4. At the 8-week mark, I had gotten myself up to 8 ounces of chicken, and switched over from that to 96% fat-free ground beef, because I knew at that point from watching and reading Dr. Eid talk about the superiority of red meat for the brain, and also backing that research up with Dr. Sean Baker and Dr. Ken Berry, both saying the same thing. All meat is going to heal you, but there are, more nutrients and a power package in red meat than there are in chicken and pork. It's all good, but I knew I wanted to try to switch over to that. So I did that. At the 3-month mark, 6-month mark, I started to notice some changes. I was up to about 10 or 12 ounces of ground beef, and some of my psychiatric symptoms were lessening for the first time in my life. I was a little bit less anxious. I was a little less depressed. The brain fog was lifting. I could do more thought-related activities with my children than I could before. Before, it kind of felt like that I had cotton balls between my ears, that I just couldn't complete a task. I couldn't help them with homework the way that I should have been able to. And that broke my heart because I couldn't get my brain to function right. So I noticed some small changes. The Anorexia was no better yet, but I saw a reduction in the anxiety and the depression. The cutting and hair pulling the frequency of it was less. And at that point, at the 6-month point, for the first time in my life, the screaming voices felt now like they were in another room with the door closed. They were still there, still screaming, but they were quieter. And I had never experienced that in my entire life. So I continued on. I knew that I needed saturated fat. And so at that point, I started cooking chuck roasts in the slow cooker in order to get that connective tissue, the fat profile, without alarming my anorexic part. And I was able to do that at that point. During that time, my brain was functioning well enough for me to start to suspect if some of the vegetables that I was still eating, because I was adding the meat into my daily portions of spinach and celery. I wanted to see if any of my physical illnesses would lower or heal if I excluded the vegetables and went on meat only, beef, salt, and water. At that point, you know, the coined term, the lion diet, wasn't out there yet. Mm-hmm. But you know, the term that I use now to describe it, because that's what I did. And between nine months and 12 months, as I did that, I had a lot of healing of a lot of my physical illnesses that doctors told me were incurable, that could never get better, that I knew then were oxalate related. The oxalate crystals and the oxalate toxins were causing my vulvodynia, were causing my interstitial cystitis. They were causing my IBS. And because of the oxalates and other anti-nutrients that are in some vegetables, I know that played a role in my thyroid not functioning right and my osteoporosis, because it was leaching minerals from my bones. So I spent almost 2 years on the first 2 years of this quest on the lion diet, on a very strict, in order to gain the most healing that I possibly could. That first year, at the 12-month mark, everything was gone. Everything was completely gone. The screaming voice, for the first time, as far back as my memories will go, was completely, absolutely, 100% permanently gone. I had overflowing joy. There was no depression anymore. There was no anxiety anymore. I could look at the activities of the cutting and the hair pulling and just walk away. Just, this is not serving me. This is awful. I don't need to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Every anorexic feature was gone. The drive to starve was completely and utterly gone. I looked at myself in the mirror for the first time and could see what I looked like, the devastation of what I actually looked like. The over-exercising, the OCD features, the obsessive compulsive features were completely gone. I was ready to rebuild my body and not punish it anymore. I was ready to work with my body and learn about satiety and hunger when I never even knew what those were, because I spent so many years starving myself. It's just been absolutely amazing to spend the last 6 years to be this free. The first few months that I gained this freedom, I worried that the rug would be pulled out from under me and it would come back, you know. But as time went on, I began to really relax that first year and to know that it's not coming back, that it's healed. My brain has healed. And in order to explain to others that weight restoration on carbs doesn't heal anything mentally, I also tell them this, that at that first year at my mental illness complete healing, I had not gained a pound yet. I was still between 75 and 80 pounds. That weight came after. I added and rebuilt my body after that. There was no weight that was gained in that first year for anyone to tell me that's why I was better, because I gained weight. Had not gained any weight yet. So I spent the second, third, and fourth year rebuilding. I searched everything I could possibly search on how to heal my hypothyroid, to get my thyroid working correctly. I developed a protocol of what I needed to do in terms of supplements and nutrition and weightlifting and how much protein it was going to take, because your thyroid depends on protein. I did the same thing with my osteoporosis diagnosis. Up until my healing that first year, those 5 fractures were devastating. I didn't want that for the rest of my life. And doctors told me, you can't reverse osteoporosis. Well, when I did a deep dive and discovered that your bone is 50% protein, I set out on a quest to prove them wrong, to say, I'm going to reverse this. I'm going to figure out what minerals I need that bone is made from. I'm going to up my protein so high in order to have enough extra to rebuild bone density. I'm going to get the sun that I need to get in order to assimilate vitamin D. That's also going to help my bones. I'm going to start weightlifting, because you can't rebuild bone and correct osteoporosis without weightlifting and heavy lifting. And I completely reversed it. I do not have osteoporosis. I do not have hypothyroid anymore. And I question everything about mainstream medicine now. I'm thankful that we have a handful of doctors that we can trust, but the rest of them that are in mainstream, I don't trust them. And unless I have a trauma that I can't heal myself, I don't plan on going back. I did that at my healing. I went back to some of them. I naively thought that they would be excited over my healing and be open to hearing how I did this. And they were not. They told me that I was experiencing a placebo effect, that I was masking my symptoms with carnivore and lion diet, and that I should better get back under active treatment before I had a psychotic break. And so my mission and my quest to affect change from the top down with my previous doctors was not what I expected. So that was when I stopped going back to them. And I now seek to affect change one-on-one with anyone that I come in contact with that suffers with mental illness and physical illness. Come alongside them if they would like me to, and help them as much as I possibly can so that they don't suffer the way that I did for 4 decades.
Valerie, you mentioned the word joy. So, how joyful it was for you, the
Yes.
recovery, the whole experience.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of your family around you.
Oh.
I can't imagine what joy they also experience seeing you eat
Yeah.
you wouldn't have touched years and years ago. What did they feel? Did they cheer you on? Because I know when I transitioned to meat eating after 30 years of veganism, vegetarianism, My daughter was the one who was cheering me on. Yes, my husband did, but my daughter was like, yes, mom, you can do it. You can do it. As I sat at the table and I wept because
Yes.
it was hard to swallow that meat. She was cheering me on. I can't believe you did that. That's good. That's good. So what was it like for you?
It was the same for me. Everyone in my life was just so overjoyed that I was eating, and starting to eat in quantity. And I was starting to change. They they were overjoyed that I was now filled with overflowing joy. And um, the last 6 years, I have made it my mission to try to redeem that time. I mean, you can't go back and fix 40 years. You can't make up for it. But my goodness, we can spend 6 years having a glorious, wonderful, colorful life to try to redeem that time. I have done that with my mom, with my husband, with my daughters. It has been amazing to finally be the wife that I always wanted to be the mom that I always wanted to be, and to be the daughter that I always wanted to be. Everyone in my life prior to this had to be my caretaker. You know, I couldn't lift anything. I couldn't help with making a fire. I couldn't carry laundry. I couldn't, there were so many things that I physically couldn't do, and so many things that I was mentally blocked from doing also that were healthy activities. And it has been absolutely amazing to be able to do that. And I'm now on an equal level playing field with everyone in my life. That I'm not an empty vessel anymore, just needing to be refilled by others. Now I'm actively equal with them, and I can give them the love that they have given to me all these years and not expect anything in return. I can be the caretaker now. I can be the one offering support. I can be the one giving the hugs and the love. And it's absolutely wonderful. Everything used to be gray. Everything used to be dark. A sunrise and a sunset, or looking at the beach or the ocean, or Christmas and New Year's, those all brought sadness to me. They were not exciting things. They were all gray and sad. And everything is now in full living color. I can stop myself when the sun is going down and just stand there at the window and just watch the sun go down and just be filled with vibrant joy. Life is precious. Life is good, and healing is priceless. It's priceless.
Well, with this beautiful, we're going to end this episode. Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. It's been absolutely wonderful to be able to spend time with you, Nairi.
We'll do it again. We'll do it
I
again.
would love to do that. Yes.
Bye for now.
All right. Bye.